They called him Black Caesar. Frank Matthews wasn't just another hustler, he was a visionary in the underworld, a man who saw the game bigger than anyone else at the time. He built a drug empire worth over $100 million, more than Nicky Barnes, more than Frank Lucas. Yet his name remains nearly forgotten outside of street lore. But in the 1970s, Frank Matthews was the definition of power, wealth, and defiance. Born in 1944 in Durham, North Carolina, Frank was raised by his aunt after becoming an orphan at an early age. By his teenage years, the streets had already claimed him. He got caught up in minor crimes and eventually was arrested for assault. Seeing the writing on the wall, Frank skipped town and made his way up north, first to Philadelphia, then to Brooklyn, New York. That's where his story truly begins. In Brooklyn, Matthews got involved in the numbers racket, an underground lottery system that thrived in black communities. It was illegal, yes, but it was big business. He quickly understood how the flow of money worked and who controlled it. But while many were content to stay in the gambling world, Frank had bigger plans. Heroin. That was the next step. The drug was exploding in Harlem and across New York City, but the business was mostly controlled by the Italian Mafia. Black dealers often had to pay tribute or operate under the mob's thumb. Not Frank. He refused to play second to anyone. He set out to build his own pipeline, independent, black-owned, and untouchable. Matthews made direct connections with international suppliers. Venezuela, Haiti, and the infamous French connection became key players in his network. He cut out the middlemen. No mob taxes. No street-level nonsense, just high-volume, high-profit operations. He didn't just bring in the product, he built an infrastructure. Safe houses, stash spots, trusted couriers. He brought structure and hierarchy to a business that had previously been chaotic and volatile. His organization had layers just like the mob, but instead of being an offshoot, it was its own power. His distribution network stretched from New York to the Carolinas, Florida, and even the Midwest. He wasn't just a dealer, he was an organizer. He hosted secret summits, bringing together Black and Latino drug traffickers to coordinate pricing, territory, and strategy. These meetings, often held in upscale hotels under the radar, were unprecedented at the time. Frank Matthews knew that unity meant power. By bringing together fragmented crews under shared interests, he created what was almost a coalition, an underground economy led by men who were tired of playing second to the mafia and tired of being seen as disposable. Frank was at the head of that movement. By the early 1970s, Frank Matthews was living like a king. Rolls-Royces, luxury mansions, fine clothes, and beautiful women. He had it all. He wasn't hiding, he flaunted his success. He threw lavish parties, bought exotic pets, spent money in ways that made it clear he had arrived. And yet, unlike other high-profile figures, he remained elusive, disciplined, and deeply calculated. He didn't drink heavily. He didn't use his own product. He wasn't reckless. He understood that his lifestyle came with a clock, but he intended to stay 10 steps ahead. Matthews also understood the value of influence. He paid off lawyers, judges, and police officers to keep his operation running smoothly. He kept clean money flowing through businesses. He funded political candidates in local races. He wasn't just buying silence, he was buying protection. In the communities he touched, he was a legend. Some saw him as a Robin Hood, using his wealth to help those around him. He donated to schools, helped people with rent, gave cash to struggling families. To others, he was a dangerous criminal who manipulated power for his own gain. But no one could deny the reach and strength of his empire. He operated with precision. When one of his stash houses was raided, he immediately moved 3 others before the cops could even return to the station. He rotated his meeting spots weekly. His drivers had layered instructions and burner numbers. He was building a criminal empire with the security of a military installation. All of this, however, was drawing attention. The DEA and FBI began investigating Matthews seriously in the early 70s. Wiretaps, surveillance, informants, all the usual federal playbook. But it wasn't easy. He was careful, smart, calculated, but the feds were patient. They built a case slowly and quietly, watching him move, learning his patterns. Then in 1973, it happened. Frank Matthews was arrested at a wedding in Las Vegas. He was charged with drug trafficking and facing decades behind bars. But this wouldn't be the end of his story. It was just the beginning of the mystery. Because Frank Matthews didn't stick around for trial. He posted a $325,000 bail. Then he disappeared, with his girlfriend and somewhere between $15 and $20 million in cash. Gone. Without a trace. No sightings. No calls. No rumors that stuck. Over 50 years later, the U.S. Marshals still have an open file on him. Frank Matthews became one of the most successful fugitives in American history. His name, for reasons unknown, was never immortalized in pop culture. No biopic, no documentaries, just whispers on the street. This was only part one of the story. In part two, we dig into the escape, the theories, and the legacy of a man who outplayed everyone, including the federal government.